This week, we're celebrating the 100th anniversary for the ratification of the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. Our reporter Jessica Edson visited with some local historians to learn what role Nebraska women played.
This week marks the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment. And just like their sisters in Washington, women in Nebraska were fighting for the right to vote long before 1920.
So it even started during the Nebraska territorial period, and one of the things I like to say is Nebraska was almost the first to have women's suffrage.
A suffrage bill was almost passed in the 1850s, falling short when the Senate ran out of time to discuss it. Eventually, Nebraska women gained partial suffrage in 1917, which allowed them to vote for presidential electors and city positions, but not state positions. In 1919, Nebraska finally ratified the 19th Amendment, giving women the full right to vote. When we talk about the right to vote, we must acknowledge the barriers that have been put in place for people of color. In Nebraska, racism was part of the suffrage movement.
In the 19-teens, there were some suffrage associations in Omaha that were being organized with African American women. So we do have newspaper accounts showing that those suffrage associations were being formed at that time. But there was racism in the movement nationally and locally. I mean, you do see that in some of the pamphlets that were distributed.
Other laws like the Civil Rights Act and Indian Citizenship Act did help tear down some of those obstacles. Now, 100 years after the passage of the 19th Amendment, voters worry a new obstacle has arisen, specifically whether or not they will be able to vote by mail.
And so I think if we were just dealing with COVID, I would feel pretty good about it. The thing about the Postal Service, I think, has complicated things, but I think it's early enough, and I think that there now is a pushback. And I think there's even recognition. I mean, I would think that this is a nonpartisan issue, because if I were in Congress and I represented a rural area of Nebraska, in some ways, those rural citizens rely much more on the mail.
Bystrom says she does expect voters, especially women, to overcome this obstacle, just like they have been doing for decades.
By 1964, women made up the majority of voters in every presidential election since. In 2016, 10 million more women than men voted in 2016.
The League of Women Voters is offering a nonpartisan voter guide on their website. Jessica Edson, 3 News Now.
We have an update yesterday. Nebraska Secretary of State Bob Evnen announced that all registered voters would receive applications for mail-in ballots.